This webinar is brought to you by Maytech Networks. Networks is a part of Maytech, a member of workforce development at the Maricopa Community Colleges, and sponsored in part by the National Science Foundation. The service that we are using today is Blackboard Collaborate version 12. Let's quickly review some of the key features. Notice the whiteboard. This is where the presentation slides will be displayed. Next, the participants box. This shows a list of everyone who is logged into the webinar. You can send a colleague a private chat by right-clicking on their name. Please be aware that moderators and presenters can see all private chats. Next, you'll see the chat box. This is where you see the chat dialogue occur. Within the chat area is the message text box. This is where you can type in your questions or comments. We'll be keeping track of any questions so that we can address them as time permits and during question and answer breaks throughout the webinar. When we do conduct polling today, this is where you'll choose your answer by clicking the button shown here to drop down the options. We are recording this webinar for subsequent viewing. Welcome to Maytech Network's webinar Technology Program Review. Now I would like to turn it over to our moderator, Mike Lezecki. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Again, it's my pleasure to be with everybody online, including our presenters this morning. Let me begin by reviewing what the objectives of today's webinar will be. So number one, we're going to summarize the issues and challenges faced in the review of occupational programs. I know I've called this Technology Program Review in our title, but it's really the occupational programs that we're talking about. Number two, we're going to explore how two different colleges approach occupational program review. And then in number three, we're going to highlight practices that are common for occupational program review. And certainly each of us at colleges and educational institutions around the country, this is a vital topic for us. It's something that we think about, something that we worry about. And I'm pleased to have with us today three people who are very concerned about this topic, and they know a lot about it. We'll have with us today Randy Kimmons. He's the Director of Workforce Development at the Maricopa Community Colleges here in Phoenix, Arizona. Randy, would you say hi once more to the group today?
Yes, good morning to everybody.
Good, thank you. And also joining us, Dr. Sharon Halford, Dean of Academic Affairs at Phoenix College. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon to those on the East Coast.
Right. And Heather Weber, Dean of Occupational Education at Estrella Mountain Community College here in the Phoenix area as well. Good morning, Heather. Heather, are you unmuted?
Good morning, everyone.
There you are. Thanks very much. Good. So let's go forward. Sharon, I'm going to click to your opening slide, and you're going to lead us off talking about important aspects and challenges for program review. So the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to move over to the next slide here.
Good.
Given our finite resources and the need to use them as effectively and efficiently as possible, regular review of all of our programs is really essential. Program review is the mechanism that assists our colleges in assuring that programs and services continue to maintain high quality and rigorous standards and that we meet community need. We also want to be sure that what we're doing connects to our mission, our vision, and our values, and that the resources that we have are deployed in a way that maximizes support for student success. Now, all colleges are different from one another, so it's difficult at best to come up with a standard definition of program. It's going to vary with the size, the structure, the philosophy of the particular college. But a commonality that you will see is that a well-defined program review is going to identify very clear and relevant criteria that will be used in the review. It will include qualitative and quantitative evidence that's analyzed and not just collected. It will be a cyclical process that's inclusive. That means it involves a lot of people. and not done in isolation, and it provides an opportunity for review and reflection upon the current and future actions that will support teaching, learning, and the service responsibilities of the various programs. Now, within Maricopa, we currently have 967 occupational programs, give or take, depending upon the day. This includes all of our Associate of Applied Science degrees and our certificates. Approximately a third of those have very limited numbers of completers, which makes it essential for us to go through a program review process that's meaningful and relevant so that we can make appropriate decisions about how to grow that program, develop it better, or to perhaps sunset it or put it into a moratorium. Program review is the vehicle that we use to boost enrollment and completion. It's a way for us to identify and address issues that can lead to program improvement, to better align the program outcomes with industry needs, to reallocate resources, and similar sorts of processes. Program review is not the time to gloss over issues and challenges and areas for improvement. Too often I think we approach it as something that's on our to-do list. It's something we need an exercise to complete, and then we can tick it off our chart and move on to something else. But in fact, growth for our programs requires a very candid, critical look at the program's practices, its perspective, and the evidence in order to develop a plan of action that will advance the program into the future. And we all know that change is difficult, so change really requires clarity about what's required to move into the future. There's an intentionality that needs to be there about building a culture that will support new strategies and practices. We know that change initiated in an unsupportive environment tends to be very short-lived. I want to take a minute now to talk more specifically about program review at Phoenix College. It's a 5-year cycle for us. That's a change from what we did previously when we had a 3-year cycle. It's a very structured process, and within the occupational area, it's a faculty-driven process. Program review for us serves as a catalyst for clarifying a program's purpose, its direction, its size, its need for resources, and the professional development that's required. At Phoenix College, program review is intended to be inclusive. So we have very broad-based teams doing program review. Review team members can include not just the program faculty, but also representatives from other instructional or service areas on campus, sometimes from other colleges, advisory committee members, institutional research staff, and others. The dean, which in this instance would be me for the occupational areas, has oversight for the program area and provides guidance throughout the process. After submission of a program review, program faculty and staff will meet with administration to review what they've submitted and to discuss their future goals, their strategies, and the resource needs. As part of the assessment process, we also look at what we call our Learning College principles. These are responsibility, collaboration, communication, and evaluation. And we ask ourselves 2 key guiding questions. One is, how does what we do improve student learning? And the second question is, how do we know that it improves student learning? We follow the program review with an annual report. So all Phoenix College programs will complete an annual review unless they're undergoing program review. The annual report's aligned with the program review, and it allows each program in its report to focus on opportunities, successes, and challenges. There are 4 key areas that we look at. One is access to learning, and in that we review things such as enrollment, retention, persistence, and completion. We'll also take a look at programmatic changes such as online and hybrid courses that have been added, changes in admission requirements to a program, or a shift to a cohort model from an open enrollment model. With effective teaching and learning, we review best practices, and we also take a look at the results we get back from student engagement surveys such as SESI, and programs talk about strategies they've implemented to address those particular pieces of feedback and the results of the work that they've done. In organizational integrity, this is where our programs take a look at the resources they have, and this can include such things as grant funding. This is also where they discuss any separate accreditations or program approvals that they have from outside entities. And then lastly, in the Pathways to Success, this is where the program discusses new partnerships, and the recommendations that have come out of the advisory committee for that specific year and the strategies that they'll put in place. So that's a quick snapshot of what we do. Are there any questions, Michael?
You know, there was a couple of questions, Sharon, that came in from the audience. And of course, one thing that caught a lot of people is that you mentioned about 1/3, did you say, of programs. I think you mentioned there was 900 some programs. About 1/3 of them, would you call them not active, or what term did you use? There was a question for clarification there.
Leaders. So, you know, they may have 1 or 2, even 3 or 4 or 5 completers, but they have very low numbers of completers. And there are a variety of reasons that could be taking place. In some instances, we have credit-heavy programs. So it may be that students are taking the courses they need to either improve their work or to get a job, and so they're leaving without graduating. In other instances, they just didn't get around to filling out the graduation application, and so one of the strategies we're looking at is integrating that application process into the capstone course for a number of our programs.
There's a thought. I had one other question from the audience for you. You mentioned you look at both quantitative and qualitative data about these programs. What would be like the leading indicator? Is it something as simple as completion, or are there a set of metrics that you might consider the most important ones to look at? That might be a hard question.
That is a difficult question because programs do vary, but certainly for all of our programs, we're looking at the number of applicants because many of our occupational programs have an application process. Yeah. See if there are barriers at that point that are precluding individuals from coming into a program. Is it the prerequisites? Is it the requirements we have for background checks? You know, does it need to be a full-time program when they want to work part-time and that sort of thing? So we look at that. We look at their success in the individual courses that they're enrolled in. We look at their persistence to the next semester, and then we certainly look at their completion. We're also beginning to really delve more into the demographics of our students, and we've just begun working with a consultant on predictive analytics, so I'm excited to see what may come out of that work.
That's good. I've been reading a lot. It seems these days it's the latest, I'm not sure rage is the right word, but predictive analytics is getting a lot of press about how it can be applied to learning situations. So that's interesting.
I think it's important because if it works the way we think it will work, it will allow us to identify where students are kind of dropping down as they go through the semester, and we can provide appropriate interventions. We don't always quite catch that with the early alert processes we have.
Right. Well, good. I think we'll have another opportunity throughout this presentation today. We might come back to you and ask you to respond to a couple of other questions, Sharon. But thanks very much for that presentation. I'm going to take us forward now, and we had questions for Sharon, but now I'm going to ask the audience a question about what review cycle do you use for program review at your institution? Now, to respond to this poll, you'll go into the participants box. That's where all the names are. And there's a little box there that has an A in it, and then you'll pull that down and you'll choose what your thing is. So please go ahead and make your choices now. Type in A, B, C, D, or some other that you can do that. So go ahead and type in your responses into that polling box. Thank you. You can't think about this too much. You either know the answer or you don't. So I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to respond here. Tracy, let's go ahead and show the results of the poll. Let's see what we have here. So people are sort of split between 1, 3, and 5 years. I think that will be interesting as we go forward. Several of our presenters today are also going to mention the program review cycle. That's good. Okay, so we've got a variety of information there from the audience. I'm going to advance to the next slide and reintroduce to you Heather Weber, Dean of Occupational Education at Estrella Mountain. Heather, you've been at Estrella for a number of years now. I'd be very interested in hearing what you say about your situation there, so the floor is yours.
Yes, and as you can see by my title, I'm sure many of you in the audience can relate to that.
Yes.
Dreaded conversation with faculty on, program review again, or even the anxiety of performing a program review for the first time. And I think at Estrella Mountain we worked really hard to integrate it into the culture. It's just part of the thing that we do. And the way we've been able to do that was prior to 2009, program review at Estrella Mountain was primarily only done by occupational programs. As we began to prepare for a self-study, it became very relevant that we were very good at conducting assessment at the course level, but we had too few programs where we conducted meaningful assessments of student learning at the program level, and it's something we really needed to concentrate on as an institution. We needed to make sure we had a stronger emphasis on student learning outcomes and consistency across programs. And then we also needed to include a flexibility for unique program components. So we were faced with several challenges as we decided to take on this big thing of program review. So in 2009, we actually implemented a new process. And so now at Estrella Mountain, the purpose of program review is to assess all programs through a systematic, cyclical process with the goal of providing better service to students and improve learning. Currently at Estrella Mountain, over 55 programs and services currently undergo a program review process. And this is done on an annual basis. So all college programs participate in a program review. Our program review is a 3-year cycle. However, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a document that a person would spend a year doing and then it got put on the shelf. So we really needed to make sure it was integrated into our college planning process. And in order to do this, especially in occupational program areas, we wanted to be sure that people were touching the information on an annual basis. The title of this program was Technology Program Review. Those of you who work with technology, you understand it changes dramatically one day to the next. We could have new programs, new software releases, things that dramatically impact our programs. So for us, not to touch the data or not to touch the information for 3 years just didn't seem like it would benefit our programs. So in order for us to really assess the currency and relevancy of occupational courses and programs, we needed to make sure we were looking at the information on an annual basis. So for Estrella Mountain, a program will go through a full review in 1 year, and then for the next 2 years, they'll do an annual update. So then on the 4th year, they're then again re-going through and doing the full review. This, of course, is a massive undertaking, and we wanted to make sure the faculty and staff felt supported through the process. As a result, in the fall, we kick off with workshops where faculty and staff can come in, refresh about the process, understand where they are, get their data, and then they're provided assistance through the research office throughout the year. The instructional deans and the student service dean are very heavily involved in the process, and there's actually checkpoints throughout the year where faculty and staff submit drafts of their program review. That way we can help keep people on track, help guide them in if they need assistance, and we're also making sure that people aren't waiting till the last minute to throw together a program review. At Estrella Mountain, we address 6 core areas in our program reviews: maximizing student success, creating a culture of assessment, creating an organizational culture to support learning, dynamic learning environment, maximizing access, partnership, and resources, and preparing for the future. This may seem overwhelming, but these are actually also tied directly to our strategic directions. There's nothing better than having faculty and staff at the program level really analyzing what they're doing and seeing if they're supporting the college's strategic direction. One of the really key things is we wanted to make sure that people understood that the work that they were doing made a difference to the college environment and that it was a consideration when the college was planning for the future. So in order for us to do this, we need to make sure that the program reviews inform divisional planning and both the updates to strategic and long-term plans. Oh, it's a duplicate. What was really unique about this process is once a division or a faculty member does a program review for their program area, that information then is considered across the campus into the strategic plan. And as you can see by those photos, that was actually a strategic planning retreat where operational areas such as instruction, student affairs, and administrative services were seated at tables and looking at the 5 to 10 program reviews in their areas, and they were coming up with common things. They were coming up with things that would impact the institution or their areas, and those were then lifted up so we could identify institutional things. And that was really key. Everybody was a part of the process. The information that they had put together in their program reviews was then being elevated to the next operational level, which then is elevated to the college level. And as you can see here, it was really important for us to make sure that program review is integrated into the college planning cycle. And you can kind of see off to the left, continuous improvement, where program review is directly linked to division and operational plans. As I had mentioned, the core planning areas, that 6th area is preparing for the future. Well, that is the division plan's 3-year plan. So at the end of their program review, they have their 3-year plan, and the annual updates are actually updates to their division plans. There's a lot of lessons learned from program review, although we've done a lot of great work to implement it across the college campus. There are things that we have definitely learned along the way. Some things include the elicitation of more direct responses and analysis, making sure that if there's key indicators that we want to make sure that faculty and staff are addressing, that those are included in the program review template to make sure that they're being addressed. The other thing is consider moving to an online form to make sure that you're providing the data for them and they're actually responding. That's a suggestion that we're looking at to help make sure this process moves more smoothly. And just actually making sure that faculty can close the loop on that data. So if we're providing it to them and they're able to just respond directly into an online form, we're able to really streamline this program review process for them. Mike, that about concludes for Estrella Mountain. Any questions?
Thank you, Heather. Let me advance the slide just as a reminder to participants that they can put their questions into the chat window. There's several questions that came up, and you talk about this process. I understand it now because at first I was a little confused about the annual versus the 3-year, but I see it that it cycles every 3 years. You do a complete program review, but year 1 is followed by year 2 and 3 updates, and then you're back into the cycle. So I think I understand that correctly.
Correct.
Good. Certainly this takes time and effort by faculty and the other stakeholders that you mentioned. Is that part of their load? I mean, or is it considered like a committee meeting? I mean, where do the faculty find the time to do this in the midst of all those other things? Or is it just simply built into what they do?
It's built into what they do, and that was really critical in providing the support structure and why we were very sensitive to making sure that they had places for them to do the work. So since it's built into what they do, it's part of their responsibilities as a chair or program director. If we're talking specifically about faculty, we wanted to make sure that they were able to do it and not struggle. So the workshops throughout the year where they can come in and do work and work directly with research staff really help alleviate some of those stresses of being on their own and trying to do this work. The other thing, it directly impacts their programs, and it is their division planning as well. So for occupational programs, for example, a division may have 7 different types of programs. For occupational ed, we have culinary, teacher ed, AGS, fire science. When a division chair is trying to do their division plan, the program director's program reviews will feed that up. So it's really integrated work. It's something that they do as part of their responsibilities, and creating a campus culture where everybody across the campus is doing a program review, I think also helps alleviate some of those concerns about overloading the faculty, because it's something that everyone's doing across the board. There's not a program that doesn't undergo a program review process.
I certainly think that's a good approach, a sound approach. Sharon, as long as we've got you on as well, it seems to me that Phoenix College has a similarly inclusive type of approach. Do you have any comments you'd like to add to what Heather just said?
No, other than I really encourage people to look at sort of a broad-based inclusive approach with program review, because you do get different perspectives from those who maybe aren't intimately involved with your particular program, and those new insights really can lead you in very different directions sometimes.
Sure, that makes sense. Heather, I have one more question for you before we go ahead. You talked a lot about faculty and their role and their participation. When it comes time to make decisions about programs, are the faculty, what is their role? Are they part of the decision making, or do they make recommendations, or are they intimately involved in the decision, or is that an easy question to answer?
That's not an easy question. They actually are very heavily involved in that process. This is relatively new for us, so we're just now undergoing our second full cycle of program review. And one of the things that has emerged over the past 4 years is a lot of our faculty are looking at the program data, and they're making recommendations on their own of what they want to do in their areas. So for occupational education, for example, if they have 1 or 2 programs that are struggling, I've had instances where the faculty have recommended to, close one so they can put all their efforts into growing the secondary. So that has been very, very beneficial, because they're taking control of their program areas. They know they need to make recommendations that help support completion, and that's what they're doing. And they're really looking at that data, and then they're making the recommendations up and helping shape the campus in their program areas by doing that. So I think it's really a partnership, because they're working so closely with their deans in their program reviews when they're doing them, but they really are, at least at this stage of the Estrella Mountain Program Review cycle, they're really making recommendations on what they want to see happen with their program areas. And those are strongly being considered by administration.
Okay, good. Very good. I realize that was a harder question, but I don't know, it seems to me that you're certainly on the right track there. Friends, let's go forward. We've been asking questions again of our presenters, and now let me turn with a polling question back to our participants. Now think about your own situation. You're sitting there in your own desk at your own college or wherever. When you conduct program reviews, when we conduct program reviews, we consider A, industry input and advice to be one of the most critical factors. B, we ask industry for their hiring projections, but that's about it. And C, we don't involve industry as much as we should. I didn't give you none of the above options, so please go to the left in your participant window, and please use the box there. You'll see a choice of A, B, or C. And don't worry, we won't point any fingers at anybody. I think I'm going to click C, because even though I claim I involve industry, I think I could do it more. So let's see, please put in your pollings. Let's take a look at a bunch of answers. Tracy, let's take a look at the results of this poll. Interesting. Okay, so most folks say industry input, well not most, but a good fraction say industry input and advice is one of the most critical factors. And number C, like me, we don't involve industry as much as we probably should. So that's interesting. Obviously the role of advisory committees and industry members is an important thing. I'd like to now bring Mr. Randy Kimmons to the floor. He's the Director of Workforce Development at the Maricopa Community Colleges. Randy, you've got a lot of experience both as a dean and in workforce development with program review. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the elements of program review as you see them?
Sure, and I think that, if you look back at what some of the comments that Sharon and Heather both made, some of the critical things when you look at elements are really being all-inclusive of faculty and staff and your business and industry partners in the community when you get involved with this. I think that's really key. And the other piece of that that's really important that both of them touched upon, I think, is looking at the whole sustainability, because certainly we're really focused on student success with program review, but the biggest focus really should be and is what business and industry is asking us for and how are we meeting those needs. Because if there's no jobs at the end of the pipeline, if you will, and there's no positions for people to prepare for, then there's no point in having the program. So I think the whole part of looking at what industry is asking us to do is critical. And it really is all about jobs, jobs, and jobs. So that's a key thing. It's maybe an obvious thing, but it's important to remember that and to make certain that you include that in your program review process. I think that the biggest part too related to that when we look at all of our 10 colleges, at least in our district, that's really a consistent pattern that they use is that they do include business and industry in this process, and that we have advisory committees for each one of our programs to make us aware of how we should shift our curriculum, how we should update our equipment in the classroom, instructional aids, and so on, and what we should do farther to keep things as innovative as is possible. The other area that, when we have a 3 and a 5 year and then looking at things on a yearly basis, most of the colleges look at things continually, at least at the costs that are going on a continual basis and the enrollment and the number of completers, how that is going, how that is progressing. I think that is really important as well. So those are the kinds of things that I think are important. And then overall, also looking at the staffing requirements and what impact your adjunct faculty as well as your full-time faculty, any technical staff that's needed, especially in the occupational areas, is also an important area to consider. When we look at additional elements, I think the other thing that's really critical is looking at, again, going back to employer satisfaction. If we have students that complete degrees, and we also have students completing a certificate, what's also important to note, I think, is that more and more of the colleges nationwide are looking at industry-specific, industry-specific tests and certifications that are completed in a pretty fast track. So it's really important for us as community colleges to stay on track with what those requirements are and how we can best set up our curriculum to meet the needs of students to pass those tests. So that's really critical. I think the other area, I won't go through all of these, but I think the other area is, how many completers do we have in a program, and what's the enrollment in a program, and what is the cost thereof? So it's really important to look at the cost per footsie or the cost per student of a program, and if it's getting to be out of hand, then that probably needs to be looked at. And that's one of the ways to start looking at making decisions about moratorium, or if you're going to sunset a program entirely from what you're going to be doing in the future. Then next, I think looking at the feasibility of a program. I know when I was a dean, faculty would come into my office and ask me, boy, I would really like to do X program, and seems to be a demand in that. I would right away tell them, that's good, that's great, you're excited, but you need to really look at having a feasibility or business plan that does look at cost, that looks at staffing, capacity. Will it require more building? Will it require more facilities, more labs? That can get pretty expensive. So again, it's important to look at what the industry needs are and if there's going to be a sustainable demand over the future, not just over the next few years, but that there's going to be a need for many hundred or if not thousands down the road of employees needed in a particular area to allow that program to persist over time. We've done, lately we've done some benchmarking of different colleges, Miami-Dade we also looked at the Dallas system, we looked at North Carolina because it kind of is looked at in terms of a state that has a wide breadth of community colleges statewide, and they're coordinated somewhat statewide. So we thought we would benchmark some of those, and obviously the completion agenda is putting a lot of pressure on all of us to make certain that we can look at having those students that have maybe already taken in courses with the program but they haven't finished yet, and we try to get in touch with them through program review in terms of trying to get them to complete. The other thing is the federal government looking at all the compliance issues that are now facing us and making certain that a student that completes the program not only finishes, but that by the time they finish, that certainly they're getting prepared for a career and some employment that will give them a sustainable wage over time. And it's something that they can definitely live on. They're not going to end up with a minimum wage job in the career that they're looking at. Some of the other areas, I think it's important that we look at the accreditation. Our HLC, for example, there's other agencies across the country, professional associations, they all are looking now and ratcheting those requirements up. For example, in healthcare, a lot of our allied health areas now are starting to look at requiring baccalaureate degrees as kind of an entry-level area to start for students. So we need to adjust our programs accordingly with that. And then the other thing that's really important, and I touched upon this earlier, is aligning the program curriculum with the industry standards. And that's why those advisory committees are so critical to try to look at how we need to change programs, the courses, the requirements, and make certain that we have a constant dialogue with industry. With IT, for example, that's very difficult because it's changing constantly. We need to stay on top of that and make certain that we have the right software and hardware that's current for students to make sure that when they complete that they've got the same kind of knowledge and skills that are going to be needed once they get out into the workplace. So those are some of the kinds of things that I think are important when we look at program review in general. And maybe just another point or two, I think that it's really important when we look at program review, and we don't always do this either, that we look at it in a comprehensive way. And I think that Heather kind of touched upon this, that program review cannot just be done for occupational, but when you do the occupational program review, you've got to kind of look at the student affairs piece of that. You've got to look at the general arts and science or general ed piece of that, because it's all interdependent. And if a student doesn't know how to articulate their ideas or problem solve or critically think, and a lot of that comes from reading, writing, English, math, those kinds of things, then you want to make certain that those kinds of things are included in your curriculum. And we constantly, I think, need to be looking at that to develop those soft skills for students to get ready for the workplace.
And Randy,
yes.
Did you? I was going to have a question for you, but I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
You talked a lot about industry and how jobs are important. You mentioned employer satisfaction. Well, of course, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because, I mean, how do you measure employer satisfaction? I guess you would have to know which of our graduates are actually being employed there, the whole other can of worms. But do you think there's an easy way to get an employer satisfaction? What have you seen work in that area?
I don't know if there's an easy way. I think that's a continual task that we all have to work on. But I think the stronger the relationships we develop with business and industry over time, will help us to do that. Again, I think the advisory committees are important, that we keep viable industry partners involved in that dialogue and on those committees. I think the other thing is that we have to come up with tools that we can constantly be surveying business and industry to find out how pleased they are with our product, with our graduates, with our completers, and try to get as much good information from them as we can. And I think the other part of that is, again, a national trend that more and more we're not putting the job placement piece of this at the end of the program. We're starting to look at putting that at the beginning, like we do with apprenticeships, where a student will get into a program, but they almost have to be accepted at least partially by the employer at the beginning when they get into the program, so that they're going to be successful and have that continual carrot, if you will, throughout the pipeline as they go through, knowing that they have an affiliation with the employer. So I think the closer we have the students involved with employers as they go through the program, that's probably the best way to get continual information on a regular basis.
You know, I think you're right about that. That reminds me, Randy, of a program that I recently heard about in one of the Kentucky systems. They have a strong partnership with automotive manufacturing there. I think Toyota was the industry partner, and they had this very interesting program where students were actually hired by Toyota and then enrolled in the program simultaneously, and then they had certain requirements to make, but there was a very tight relationship between the company and the college and the students and the workers. It just seemed to make sense, and they had their completion rates were really much higher than what normally you might see. So yeah, I think you've got a good point there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we have GM, Ford, Chrysler, Honda, and Toyota here within our district. And again, when the student gets into the program, they interview with the employer as they're getting in, and they spend, in a 16-week semester, they'll spend 8 weeks on campus in coursework, and then they'll spend 8 weeks with the dealership working on cars and with pretty high-level technicians that are already there, so that they really do get a realistic way of getting involved with getting their skills honed.
I'd like to ask you one other question that came in from the audience, and it's going to require me to go back one slide. So I'm going to take us back one slide if that's okay. And there it is, that first bullet, cost per footsie. You mentioned that it's pretty important not to have an unreasonable cost per footsie. And so let me press you a little bit on that. What does that mean? Is there a national benchmark for what might be a reasonable cost, or does it vary college to college, program to program? Can you elaborate a little bit there?
I think what you have to do with that, when I was at Glendale Community College as dean, when we looked at cost per footsie, that was a pretty good benchmark for us. But all we simply did was take the total number of students, and then we also looked at the total cost of a program. But we looked at basically salaries of staff and faculty, divided that by the number of students, and that was our cost per footsie. Now, what you're not looking at with that, obviously, is facility usage and equipment and other kinds of cost factors. Right. Can get pretty elaborate. But I think when you look at doing a cost per footsie across the campus with all of your programs, and you're seeing some costs at maybe $13,000 or $14,000 per footsie, or as low as maybe $2,000 per footsie, and your average is somewhere in between. If a cost is getting pretty high up there, you need to look at that and really see the number of completers that you've got as opposed to the cost. So I don't know if there's really a national number. I think as much as we can try to look at that, I think it really goes per college. And because there's so many factors with programs and the community, and although a cost might be high, there might be politics involved in the community to keep a program going. Hopefully you've got partnerships with business and industry that can defer the cost of equipment and some of the other things. But so that's kind of a moving target.
I think that's a good response. For example, there might be a high-tech industry partner saying, look, we've got to keep this program going because, we may be coming into a hiring bloom coming up or something. A college could go to them and say, okay, let's talk about how we might be able to financially support this program to bridge it over or something like that. I guess that could happen, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Good. Let me take us forward, Randy, and thank you for that. I'm going to go 2 slides forward now. And now comes the hard question, the challenge of moratorium and sunsetting. I think we could agree on these somewhat simple definitions. A moratorium is a temporary suspension of admission to an academic program, major, minor, or specialization. And in terms of sunsetting, we define that as actually discontinuing offering a program to new students. So sometimes these bring up a lot of issues, and Sharon, I think I'm going to start with you. It can be difficult to make these decisions, but necessary. Can you give us a little bit of background from your own experience on how you approach these 2 things?
Sure. As you mentioned, it definitely is a decision that's not made lightly. It's something that really requires considerable deliberation by multiple parties of not only the program enrollments, their completion rates, the return on investment, workforce opportunities, and other factors. But we also have to look at the potential social, economic, and political implications of a closure versus a moratorium. As we've noted earlier in our discussions here, one of the functions of program review is to assess the viability of the program. Hence, we do have programs that recommend at the conclusion of the review process placing some or all of its degree or certificate or instructional components on moratorium or even sunset. However, it's been my experience that that's the exception. Rather than the rule, that's a challenging recommendation for faculty to make, especially if they've got some emotional investment in the program or other concerns. Aside from personal investment in a program, certainly there are concerns about the students that are in the pipeline. There are concerns about the impacts on community and industry relationships. And so those can really stall any decision to close the program. So when we get to that point and we've got a program that has low enrollers, low completers, and a recommendation isn't forthcoming from our faculty, it really becomes my role then to facilitate additional conversation with the program around the reasons it's not doing well and what the next step should be. So it's critical in these discussions that we be very transparent. So it's got to be an inclusive conversation. It's got to be done in an open environment that allows the voices of all those that are impacted to be heard. And in the end, we may make a decision other than closure. We may decide that partnering with another college who offers the same program is the viable option. We may determine that retraining program faculty to boost their currency in the discipline is the appropriate step. We may decide that we need to create and implement a business plan in an attempt to revitalize a program within a certain period of time. And then if it doesn't come to fruition, our next step would be examination of moratorium or closure. Certainly restructuring the program is a possibility. We may eliminate courses that were viable at one point in time but really are no longer necessary. They just kind of lingered on in the program. We may look at reducing the credit hours or we may choose to build stackable certificates so that students can come in, complete a small certificate, go to work, come back, take another certificate that builds onto the first one, and so forth. We've also examined most recently shifting programs away from a credit to a non-credit model. In certain instances, that really is the most appropriate step to take. And then we have also chosen in cases to eliminate the program degree or certificate, but we continue to offer the viable courses. So this is just a very involved conversation. It takes time. This is not an easy, simple decision to make, but it's a worthwhile conversation when you've got a program that just is not working well.
You know, Sharon, isn't it amazing that a community college can have the flexibility to do those things that you mentioned, everything from shifting to non-credit to restructuring to retraining, so to speak, faculty into a related discipline. It's just amazing all the options you have. I think that's one of the great things about community colleges is that flexibility. It just struck me while you were saying that.
Oh, you know, the faculty own the curriculum, and so, you know, wanting to maintain the integrity of the curriculum and yet looking at ways we can offer it so that it's meeting community needs is really most important to us.
Thanks. You know, Heather, can I ask you the same question? That is, these topics can be challenging. What about your own experience involving either moratorium or sunsetting? What are some of your own observations?
Just to really add to what Sharon was saying is that this isn't a decision that's made in haste or quickly. I think with the program review cycle at Estrella, what it's allowed us to do is, you know, during a full program review, a faculty member might begin to see the data and understand. They might have already known that some of these decisions need to be made, but they're allowed to explore, just as Sharon was saying, the possibilities of what can happen. Do we need to actually just sunset the program and move forward, or are there other options that we can still provide the service to our students? And this process of allowing them to go through it actually allows them to work among the division and have those ideas and come forward with them. And I think that's really critical because it's coming from them. And that recommendation, they're then allowed to go out to the environment, and we're allowed to work with the community. And especially in occupational programs, when these things tend to happen, going to the advisory boards and having these discussions, if that's all integrated in your program review process, it makes these very difficult conversations and decisions a little bit more manageable. It's not being forced upon them. It's something that's being moved forward. And not to say that that doesn't preclude very difficult things from happening upon the conclusion, but it really takes away, I think, some of the bias when people are evaluating their own programs that can happen. One thing that's very important that I wanted to mention about program review when we do it here is it's a very transparent process. These program reviews are posted upon a SharePoint site and actually could be reviewed by anyone at the college. And I think that too helps really provide some concrete and substantial recommendations from faculty, because these are going out to their peers and can be reviewed by their peers. And having that element of part of the process makes people aware of what's going on with programs. It's very a transparent process. Financial aid is aware and involved in the process, and those are all things you need to consider when you're making these type of recommendations.
You know, the transparency is a good point. I've talked with some colleagues. I was just on the phone the other day with a colleague from New York at one of the community colleges there, and we were talking about the transparency. They do a similar thing about, they don't use SharePoint, but they had other ways of posting it. And he said, you know, we got this original feeling from some people, why should we be hanging out our laundry on the line for everybody to see? You know, he was joking about that a little bit. He says, but that wasn't the case. When we became more transparent, it seemed to get people's interest more. They wanted to be part of it. So it had a net positive effect of being that way. And it sounds like that probably happened with you at Estrella as well.
I think one of the positives was you have a struggling program in one area of the college, and by putting it out there and bringing together the campus community to either solve it or move it forward, you also promote a lot of collaboration among divisions that perhaps would not have worked together previously. And by sharing information and sharing the data and really letting things out there, it just kind of helps alleviate that unknown factor and really promotes some collaborations that you would not necessarily have.
Good, thank you. Randy, let me turn to you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you about industry's role in these two issues. Do you think how should industry be involved in a moratorium decision or a sunset decision? It really is a college decision ultimately. How do you think industry ought to be involved here? What's your experience?
Well, I think it's pretty critical that they are involved as well. I think when you've gone through the entire process of looking at considering moratorium, and it is a process, it's not something, as has been mentioned, that's something that should occur overnight, but I think, it's going to be pretty readily apparent when you've got a good relationship with an industry that, yeah, there is some demand, but the demand is really waning. And I guess one that comes to mind that I was involved with some years ago was an agriculture program that we just could not get it to work out. It did not have the number of completers. It didn't have as strong of a relationship with industry, although there were some, for example, landscaping and pesticide and desert plant design and those kinds of things that are unique to the valley. Here, there wasn't a lot of large numbers of completers, and I think that industry is pretty frank about the fact that, okay, maybe a program isn't needed any longer, but at least keep some of the courses that are relevant for getting the appropriate skills to people as best as we can. So I do think it is a college decision, as you mentioned, but again, it's got to be something that faculty are involved in, the community, business and industry, and everybody's involved in as well, so that everybody understands what's happening and why. And I think if you end up making almost a business decision with this, which is exactly what it is in the end, if you end something like this, everybody really understands it. And I think as long as you set up a moratorium where you allow your students that are in the pipeline to finish, that you keep courses going that are relevant to the program area, to allow still for industry to get some of their needs met, but not necessarily through a program, I think then you're on a good course. And it certainly is something, though, that you can always come back at later if suddenly the industry changes, which often can happen, and you can revitalize something or reinvent it or whatever. So
that's a good point. It's a good comment. We're perfectly on time this morning. What we're going to do is a brief review of what we've done and then open up for some final questions to the panelists. So you've heard us this morning summarizing issues and challenges faced in the review of these occupational programs. And then thanks to Sharon and Heather, we had an opportunity to look closely at how two different colleges approach occupational program review. And finally, highlighting practices that are common for occupational program review. And, although not here on the objectives, we talked about what some of the opportunities are. Randy, you just mentioned things like if the program doesn't continue, at least you can support specific courses if the industry requires those for skilling of their current workforce. Sharon mentioned maybe switching to non-credit. That struck me as an interesting opportunity as well. So we had a broad range, and I see this webinar today as just being the start of this broader discussion about how we approach this, how we can refine this topic. Let me remind people that you can put questions here in the chat window, and let me bring this question forward now to all three panelists, or I'm not sure who would like to talk about it, but one of our participants asked, how are course level assessments of student learning outcomes? Right, that's everyone has to have those today, right? Course level student learning outcomes. Are those linked into program assessments? Heather, do you do that at Australia? Do you actually look at that level of granularity?
We're trying to. We start at the course program level completion, and then what we've tried to do in occupational areas is really look at the course level rates and then see, where are we losing students in that area. So if we have a course where it's really evident that students aren't persisting on to the next course, the faculty then are able to go into that course and see what's happening. The other part that's built into the program review is we have a whole area focused on assessment, how many faculty are participating and completing the campus assessments at the course level. Are the adjuncts being trained in course level assessment, and are they completing what we call at Australia called a CATS assessment, where they can go in and document through the faculty process course level stuff. So it's very much integrated. And from a program level, really starting to identify where those areas are that we're losing students, and then what's being done in those courses. That's key for us in making sure that we can improve our programs.
Good. What about you, Sharon, at PC? What's the relationship of program review to those course level assessments?
We actually are doing a couple of things, and certainly we've got more work to do. One of the things as an institution we've done is to identify some overarching educational outcomes, and these center on things such as communication, oral presentation, information literacy, critical thinking, and numeracy. And then in addition to those, our occupational programs have added one additional characteristic, and that's professional behaviors. And so what we've done with these, with each of our programs, is take common assessments and embedded them in at the course level. So we're getting data out that allows us to look not only at how the program is performing in these critical areas, but also how it compares to what other programs are doing. So we're just really kind of in our second year of doing this on an institution-wide basis. So I look forward to really seeing how this develops. The other thing that we're exploring at this point in time is software that will allow us to do program sequencing and more of the predictive analytics, because we know it's very challenging sometimes to get all the data that we need in a timely and meaningful way. So we think that this will be able to be a useful tool for us in the conversations that faculty and others have around program review.
Good. There's a predictive analytics raising its head again, right, Sharon?
It is.
Yeah, that's good. Now, audience, I want to do a couple of things, and we're going to have our final comments from the panelists. But would you help me pay the bills? And what I mean by that is we're going to launch a survey. Tracy, could you do that now? And it's a short survey. We'll just take about 90 seconds. And moderators, please don't touch the survey. And while you're taking the survey, just click on the radio buttons and then hit submit at the end. While we're doing that, let me ask you this question about program review. It came up from one of the participants who's a faculty member. He said, sometimes when I see a program as, I see my enrollment, I'm struggling with enrollments. I've gone to my administration and said, well, how about putting some more marketing dollars into my program? If you get a question like that, Sharon, is there an easy answer? I mean, it's an easy question to ask, but I'm not sure the answer is so easy. How about if we do more about recruiting? That would be a common question, I think, in some ways.
Those are very common questions. I think there's an assumption, and certainly when I was a program director and a department chair, I asked the same sorts of questions when I was going through program review. If enrollments are dipping, what are we doing about marketing? What are we doing about recruitment? Because what we often see is that an institution is focused on recruiting for the institution overall and not for a specific program. So we take again, we have, exploratory conversations. We really take a look at, the demographics. Where are our students coming from at this point in time for the program? What sort of outreach are we doing in those communities? Are there ways that we can strengthen it? What type of marketing would be effective within the various communities where we want to recruit students for this particular program? So we work very closely with our institutional effectiveness office, who can give us that type of information and really help us make those decisions, because marketing dollars, as we all know, are limited, like all of our dollars.
Sure.
And we want to make sure we use them as equitably and effectively and efficiently as we possibly can.
Good. Thank you for that comment. I'm just going to remind the audience we're going to leave the survey up just for about another 20 seconds. So if you have any comments that you'd like to add. Now, let me ask you one other question. I'm going to paraphrase it slightly, and Heather or Randy, maybe you want to take a look at it. If you had to look, if someone asked you, what are the most characteristics, the 3 top characteristics of a program that is successful, what would you say? Randy, I might start with you. Maybe you would say it's aligned to industry, it leads to good wages. Those are sort of general comments, but if someone asks you, what are the characteristics in your mind of a very successful program, what would you say?
Well, I think that the connection to business and industry is key. That's really critical. If you've got a variety of core industries, whether they be small, medium, or large, that are really actively supporting the program and certainly hiring the graduates, and there's plenty of openings over time, I think that is just critical. It's a mainstay. And then also having a situation on a campus where the administration, the faculty support the program, and the faculty stay current in the area because they, again, I think Sharon had mentioned, they own the curriculum, they own a lot of the program. And I think giving support to the faculty are so involved in teaching and in the classroom and with instruction, with all the changes taking place, with shifting from how important footsie is to completers and looking at instructional delivery, that they don't always have the time to go out and recruit students and market the program. And they need help with that, and they also need help with keeping the relationships current with business and industry and keeping those relationships solid. So I think as an administration and as a workforce office here at District, that's our job to help them to get those things done. So the more supportive a program gets supported with those kinds of things, I think the better off it is. And then finally, I think, supporting students and looking at, we talked about assessment. I think when you look at program review, you've got to look at students' progress from not only the course level and the program level, but campus-wide, the success rate of students and how they might need different areas and different tutoring support and so on. So I think it's that whole picture that's really critical. So that students giving support to faculty, support to students, and definitely having a viable group of business leaders in any particular industry really behind that program and staying behind it and doing what they can to support the program. Those are just really key mainstays as I see it.
Good. Thank you very much. Let me close the survey, folks. I'm going to count down from 5 and then close the survey. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so there's the survey. Heather, let me ask you a related question, if I don't mind, if you don't mind, rather. It's about marketing again. Do you do program-specific marketing at Estrella, or is it more general? Something, for example, you say, you enrolled today in the healthcare program or whatever, or is it more broad for the college as a whole?
And that's a challenging one because every program would like dedicated marketing dollars, and that tends to surface actually in program reviews and has for quite some time if they had dedicated marketing or increased presence on the homepage, or that would drive enrollments. And how marketing chooses to highlight programs is not always something that we do have say into, and whether they pick a nursing photo on top of a billboard versus a culinary photo or just a general student, we don't actually have say. But what we've tried to do is really take a look at how we can help faculty market their programs internally and really establish a presence for these programs on the campus and in the high school so students are aware of them. And this kind of combines with the question you just asked Randy about the critical components of a program.
Yes.
What we've really tried to do is package the programs into institute models, and these are how the program reviews are structured as well. So for example, a student has a clear structured pathway to completion. The programs are directly tied to hands-on experience, whether through internships or they're actually doing apprenticeships out with industry. And by doing these structured type of programs where it's directly linked to faculty advising and things like that, we're able to create a presence for the program on the campus, such as the Culinary Institute or the Public Safety Institute. And this is allowing us to then market those programs more effectively. So recruiters are able to articulate about an institute model versus the 5 programs that are underneath it. So when a student comes to Estrella, they're able to say, I heard about this Public Safety Institute, can you tell me more? So we're really trying to look at those strategies to help, because we need to help our advisors be able to speak clearly about our programs. We need to be able to have our faculty, all the front lines people, if they call student life, everybody needs to understand these. That's how you market your program effectively. So, it's just not a matter of which program gets put on a billboard. It's how do you really have a general understanding of what you're offering the community, and how business can talk about it, how community can talk about it, how your recruiters can talk about it in a way that makes sense to everyone and they understand what you're trying to do.
I really like that integrated approach. I mean, it's something that people can get behind, and I think you're right from a student perspective. I could just see them relating to something like that. It's a good idea. Let me, panelists, let me take us a bit further forward here. We're almost at the end of our session. I'm going to do a little advertising of my own. To access the recording and slides and handout from today, you can visit our website and type in under the keyword Technology Program Review. And for those of you online, you'll be sent, who have registered for this, you'll be sent a notice of the recording link. We'll get that out on Monday. There's some cool upcoming webinars. On May 10th, we're going to talk about designing a corporate college, very topical today across the country. And in June, after school's out, I guess, we're going to be talking about online learning strategies from a theory and a practical application standpoint. And you can see these sort of things at maytechnetworks.org, and you can see the URL in the chat window, and you can cut and paste that if you like. For those of you who would like a certificate and attended this live version, we can provide that by requesting it from Shannon Payne at dealmail.maricopa.edu. I want to thank you all for attending today, and let's turn to our final round with our participants. Let's start with Randy. Randy, what did you hear today that really struck you, or that really gave you an impetus to take a future action, or something that resonated with you? Something brief.
Oh, gee. I think that again, one of the most important parts of all of this is to make certain that when you get involved with review, that it's a deliberative process, that it's a process that's all inclusive, that it, when we talked about kind of the marketing piece and faculty's concerns, that it might not just be marketing. There might be a lot of different things going on with the program. That it's important to really stay in touch with business and industry. That it's important to look at the assessment pieces of what a student is learning, in a program, and is it current? Is it all-encompassing enough? And then the other part of it that maybe we haven't touched upon maybe as much is how are we connecting a program with a career pipeline? How does it connect to a high school on students that might be interested in the program at a community college and moving forward with it? And how are we connecting not only to the business community but also to potentially the universities, if it's, as an example, an engineering course or program that requires higher level education. So I think it's all of those kinds of things. And I think it's a process that we're going to be seeing more and more as being important because of how we're looking at becoming more effective and efficient, and that we're really going to be looked at, I think, in the future with not driven by footsie, but driven by completers and driven by what students actually learn and how we go about doing that. So I think it's going to change how we do a lot of different things, but I think review will be, an evaluation of programs will be a mainstay.
Good. Thanks, Randy. That's a good comment. Heather, let's turn to you. Something strike you today, just offhand?
Just that I know I saw one of the panelists or audience members' questions about specifics of program review, and they wish it had been more detailed on how we are doing it. And that is, we all do it a little bit differently, and it's very integrated and a little bit complex, but it's something that is critical to the success of occupational programs. And if you're not doing it, it needs to be done. And I think the thing that was key, and even between Sharon and I, is this is data and information that in occupational areas where things are changing, and as Randy just touched on, it's going to become even more critical as we move forward with some of these programs. It needs to be touched on a regular basis. So whether you do that annually or however you choose to do your cycle, getting the faculty to become aware of the data and analyzing it and understanding what is happening with their programs, you know, more than just who's sitting in their classrooms, is really key to the success of our occupational programs.
It does seem to be working from the way you described it at Estrella, so that's a good comment. Sharon, you started us off today, so that means you get the last word. Anything in particular that struck you?
I certainly want to echo the thoughts that both Heather and Randy have expressed, and to add to that, program review is not a perfect process. For those of us who've been involved in education for some time, we've probably had varying different experiences with varying outcomes of success for them. But what's important is that we keep in mind that at the heart of program review really is student success. That's why we're doing it. That's why we're engaging in the process, whatever that process looks like. And so for us to really do the best we can to promote student success, it's really important that we open ourselves up to critical introspection. I know it's very, very difficult to put your challenges and your shortcomings out there for other people to look at, but that's the only way that we really can then begin to find solutions and to grow and improve. So think of it not as the exercise that you just tick off your list, but as something that really is at the heart of improving success for our students.
That's a really great closing comment. Thank you very much, Sharon. So everyone, that officially concludes our webinar today. If you would like to, you can click on your applause button. There it's by that little smiley face up at the top of the participants, and you can give a little round of applause to Randy and Sharon and Heather. Thank you all three for your presentation today, and thank you participants for joining. Our presenters stay on the phone for just a second as we close out here. That officially concludes our webinar, and will you take us offline, Tracy? Thank you again.